to everyone and welcome. Thanks very much for coming today to our webinar. The Police Force of the Future. We'll get into talking about that soon. First of all, I'd like to go through just a very quick piece of housekeeping. Basically, the only housekeeping we really need to talk about is questions in the chat. If anyone has any questions through the entirety of the webinar, anything at all, please do put them in the chat. We'll try and get to those through the webinar, maybe at the end of the webinar, but most importantly, if you've got anything you want to put out there and we don't get to it today, we'd love to take that offline, have a chat with you over a virtual coffee, or maybe sometime soon a real one too. So I think really we should just go straight into it. I will introduce myself first, of course. My name is Justin Day. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cloud Gateway. Cloud Gateway are what you would refer to in today's world as a SASE company. Myself and my co-founder Neil Briscoe come from a network and a network security background. We essentially make sure that all of the plumbing and component parts are knitted nicely together and are secure, accredited, and working as you would expect them. A very exciting part of IT, if indeed that is something you do find exciting. I'm lucky enough to be joined today by two good friends of mine and people that we work with very closely. I would first like to introduce you to Charlie Llewellyn from AWS. And I'm also joined today by Jez Hatton from Softcat. It would be surprising if we didn't touch on the National Policing Digital Strategy. Herein, going to only refer to that as the NPDS, because I'll undoubtedly trip over that if I don't just use the acronym. And I want to start with the problem statement that ultimately is at pretty much at the top, not quite at the top, it's after the foreword, at the top of the NPDS, which succinctly addresses what we are here to talk about. It reads, policing is at a critical juncture. We either improve how we harness digital opportunities from existing and emerging technologies, or risk becoming overwhelmed by the demand they create and lose the chance to enhance and modernize our policing services. Now, I love that statement. And I'll tell you why I love that statement, because it is unarguable and it is completely and utterly right. And why do I say that with such assurance and such certainty? Is it because I am a policing expert? No, my early admission to you is that I'm not a policing expert at all. In fact, Cloud Gateway have been working with police forces for about the last 12 months, something we'll touch on a little bit more later. But I think it's important that you can replace the word policing with any other vertical, either in the public or private sector, or even more holistically. So, if I was to say emergency services is at a critical juncture, health is at a critical juncture, banking is at a critical juncture, insurance is at a critical juncture, and read the statement, then ultimately it stays absolutely true. It's still absolutely correct. So why would I jump from policing immediately to everything but policing? Because I think it's important to talk about foundations. I think it's all about the foundation on which we build. And I have a couple of key points that I can draw out of that that I'd like to lead with as well. The first is that technologists are not experts in your field. We cannot and we should never tell you how to police. We have that capability to use technology to help meet those requirements that are pertinent to you. But it's important that we recognize that you are the experts in policing. We are simply the technologists that bring that capability to the table to help meet those requirements. And why would I labor that point? Because it's important that we get that level of empathy from everybody around the table, that we understand that everybody coming from a different angle, hence I lent on policing and outside of policing, brings something important to that collective mix to build that foundation, but understanding the exact component part that ultimately they themselves bring to the table. I've seen examples, particularly of technologists that come to the table and sound like they may be expert in certain fields, policing, an example, of course, and then they're not. And it doesn't make for the right relationships and the right cultural foundation on which to build those strategies, those digital strategies. The second point would be a confidence in commonality across sectors and across verticals. I think the recognition that there are shared experiences, there are shared pains, there are shared successes, and that each of those verticals, be they inside or outside of public sector, private sector, is ultimately a win for everyone. Not digging ourselves into silos and believing that what we do is very different from here, and here. The reality is that the digital world is an ever-moving horizon. We're never going to catch that. The exponential growth of technology is so vast that we're always looking to improve, to move forwards. We're never going to catch the sun, where historically with technology we may have been able to. So it's so important that we take as much from around us across those shared experiences as possible, again, to build that foundation, to keep layering on that foundation to move forwards as we drive our digital strategy. So talking there and taking that down a level into the technology pretty much straight away, I think now's the great opportunity to bring in Charlie from AWS. Charlie, I know, has been working specifically in and around policing for what feels like several years now, and I'm sure it is. He's been working quite extensively on PALs, which I'm sure he'll tell you a little bit about in the coming minutes. Even before it was even called PALs, and it's gone through many name changes as much as everything else. But I think, again, it's important about building on those foundations, understanding how technology works with that. So without further ado, let me introduce Charlie. Charlie, tell us a little bit about what you've seen, what foundations ultimately are being built, are maybe not being built, would be advantageous. And then let's get into that discussion about PALs.
I guess before we kind of get into what PALs is, I think it's important to understand the journey that organizations go through when they adopt cloud. And Justin, to your point, this is, hundreds of thousands of customers have gone through this journey, are going through this journey, and there's a wealth of experience that we can learn for that. So when we talk to customers about cloud adoption, we typically help them identify what is the value, what is the outcome that you're driving for as an organization. And that might be some kind of simple things based on their experiences currently around maybe wanting to improve availability or wanting to reduce costs of infrastructure, but it could be more operationally focused, so looking at things like agility, or wanting to have operational outcomes like reducing time to insight so that they can do more with data and operate more effectively as an organization. Then what we typically do is work with them to help identify key performance indicators that could be used to evidence the value that they were hoping to drive by adopting cloud services. And then at that point, we suggest that they look at the technology. We'd work with customers to understand the technology that could help solve those problems. And we'd suggest that they start experimenting, and they can do that very cheaply, normally a few pounds to run up some services and demonstrate some value. That value can then be used to build a business case, and that business case can be used to secure the funding required to build a foundation to enable them to rapidly adopt cloud and scale that value that they've seen by utilizing cloud effectively. So once they've done that, typically they'll then want to start reinventing and utilizing higher order cloud services. The challenge that we've seen with public sector is that actually when we come to talk about experimentation, at that point organizations start to think about security and compliance seriously, and rightly so, because we're looking after sensitive data. I'm a citizen, I very much care about the data and how that data is maintained and governed on any infrastructure. And so at that point, we notice things can often stall. And so we've invested heavily in building the Police Assured Landing Zone, which is a technical capability which started out by, I guess, listening to the the police digital strategy, and really answering the request in there for vendors to look at providing prescriptive architecture and guidance to help organizations adopt cloud. And there's a statement in there that talks about, forces adopting cloud, 80% of workloads running in the cloud. So we then work with a number of national bodies like NEP and Police ICT Company, National Police Information Risk Management Team, to define a structure for building a secure foundation in line with common policing risks. And then we've bundled that up as infrastructure as code to remove the burden from forces of having to understand how to design and implement that. And then we provided the appropriate documentation to go along with that, so threat models, risk assessments, etc., so that forces can rapidly adopt that and have the confidence that they can start experimenting to drive that value out quickly from a cloud platform.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, it's probably pertinent that you went back to exactly the why. Why was that being asked for before we even got to the PALs? So from the perspective of PALs, if you could take, say, a key challenge that it solves, rather than the myriad I suspect it does, what has been that key driver that everything's kind of been built off of?
I suppose, a heavy index has been on compliance and assurance of the solution, because, as I say, that tends to be the first stumbling hurdle that organisations come across when they can't come to put highly regulated workloads into a cloud platform. So I think in terms of the main challenge it solves, it's addressing those compliance issues, providing the forces the confidence that they need to be able to move forward with deploying into cloud.
And what taking challenges the other way around? So rather than the challenges that you solve or resolve, what challenges have you faced or have found that have been, the biggest blockers to being able to make this, that which meets those policing requirements?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there, actually. So I guess, on the one hand, there's the complexity of understanding new systems. When you're quite new to it, you haven't had an opportunity to experiment. So I think having some technical artifacts and some documentation that's focused on your domain really helps get you started from that perspective. I think the other area is probably culture, and it's helping forces evolve their thinking or change their thinking away from kind of or to align more to a kind of approach around guardrails, so that they can enable and empower the rest of the organization to use technology successfully around the organization. And then I think the other really key area that I think we see is just lack of flexibility. I think that it's absolutely critical, given the rate of change of technology, the changes in the way that police have to operate and support society, that the platform can be altered to meet those requirements and rapidly. And I think that's really critical, a critical challenge that we see with this. And any platform that we're building and we're looking at building, that's a key tenet to make sure that the customer has the flexibility that they require as their requirements change.
Yeah, and of course, as we know, working together, the connectivity often becomes that probably one of the more difficult ones in a sort of traditional sense to approach in an almost cloud way, which of course is something that we're working to overcome with you guys. Like I said at the top, is this is something that we want to make a sort of an on-demand type capability, to be able to spin it up, be able to grow, be able to scale, rather than historically plumbing in pipes for 3 years at 10 gigs and all of this sort of thing. Being able to start small and grow. So have you seen that as a consistent issue, or is that sort of something that kind of just comes along once in a while? What's your sort of thoughts on that?
No, it's definitely a consistent issue, and I guess maybe just putting a little bit more flesh around like a landing zone, and specifically the police assured landing zone, and then addressing that. When we look at a landing zone, we consider lots of different areas. So we'd look at account structure to minimize blast radius, to clearly identify roles and responsibilities. We'd look at security and compliance, and we'd look at things like what services, what threat detection you're going to be looking at. We've done work with integration with the National Management Centre, a national security service for policing. We'd look at identity, and we'd look at integration with the NEP identity and access management solution, which we support. And then a critical area that we'll look at is the networking infrastructure. And the reason that's so critical is that, based on the workload that's going to be brought in, or the initial workloads that are going to be brought in, there are going to be lots of different requirements. There could be requirements for cloud to on-prem connectivity. There could be a requirement to specific government networks. There could be requirement for cloud-to-cloud connectivity. There could be security requirements to isolate applications and access to applications. There could be requirements for internet access. And then within those requirements, there's then a myriad of technical requirements. How much bandwidth do you need, and how latency sensitive your applications, etc. So as we bring in workloads, because we don't know what those workloads are, and we're trying to build a foundation that caters for all that, the ability to change that architecture rapidly to meet the requirements of the workloads coming in is absolutely critical.
Yeah. I think that's, what for me, you talk about on-premise workloads, you talk about all, those different considerations around PSN or security accreditation. I think, what we've seen industry-wide, which, policing falls completely within this as well, is I think because we see so much, marketing around, digital and strategy and cyber and all these wonderful words, is, like I said, it's this moving horizon. And I think people have been scared to admit that they can't get to the end within a space of time. I think that's, what the exec want to hear in many places, but I think that's changing. I think that's changing a lot. I think there's an understanding that if we're moving forward at a pace that suits our business, we're doing it in the right way, then really that is probably the biggest goal to overcome, which is why we said, technology is the enabler to this. It's not a problem to have these things that are perceived as old.
Yeah. I think that's a really important thing as well, isn't it? It comes back to that like measurement of value, provided that you've got a really close relationship between the investment that you're making, the technology that you're provisioning, and then the operational outcome aligned to what your business missions are, then you've got a really good chance of being able to iterate on what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. And that kind of, I think this, we were talking about culture as well. I think culture is one of those that I think people recognize that they're part of a changing culture. Things like risk appetite have changed drastically in the last few years, particularly in the public sector. And that's a cultural change. That's not a technical change. And some people are aware of this and are having this discussion. Some people are maybe unaware of this, but are part of it. And I think one of the things that's quite nice culturally, which actually sort of, is a nice lead into talking to Jez here, is exactly why we're here together as well, in that we operate as effectively a multidisciplinary team. The word collaboration is thrown around everywhere, but the truth is it's what we're all doing, and we have to do for the greater good of what comes out the other end. And again, I think that's very much a cultural change as well. So Jez, coming to you as our delivery specialist. That's what I'm going to call you. I'm going to say the greatest delivery specialist in the country. I'm going to make it.
No pressure.
No pressure at all. So, from your perspective, what are common and/or problematic challenges that you're seeing, particularly in policing? What sort of trends are you seeing?
Well, I kind of put together some thoughts on this, and some of them you've already covered, and there's a bit of overlap here. And I guess just to set the scene for those of you that don't know me, I'm certainly not in any way as technical as Charlie or Justin, but I do spend an awful lot of time talking to emergency services customers on the ground, and we deliver change into this environment. So hopefully can speak with at least a little bit of experience on, delivering and some of the challenges that we think are going to happen. And I think you touched on it just before, but one of the biggest things we've seen is this change in attitude. If I look back sort of 4.5 years ago when I started in policing, cloud was, for most police customers, completely off limits. We're not doing it on a governance basis. We're not using any cloud services. We're not using SaaS. 365 wasn't taken up. Landing zone didn't exist. There's been this huge change in not a long period of time. And you've got, I think there's a case of some of the forces are struggling to catch up, I think, with this pace of change. And I don't blame them at all, because it's come very quickly and the curve is really, really steep. I think we see in most senior officers and management I speak to recognise there is a skills gap. There's a skills gap in industry, let alone in public sector directly, of cloud skills, people who can kind of code and write infrastructure and design for public cloud, because no one's been doing it in policing in anger. And if we're honest, Microsoft, Amazon, Google are hiring a lot of the talent and can pay considerably more than a lot of the forces. So there's a disconnect between staffing levels. I think because of the slow pace of adoption of cloud, like you've touched on, the network infrastructure, is something close to my heart, I guess, as well as closet networking techie, I guess. The WAN infrastructure, a lot of these forces is legacy. We've got lots of customers who still run like a coin architecture with site-to-site connections in a mesh. They're not on like a central MPLS WAN type arrangement, and that ties into an overall technical debt. I think a lot of the applications that forces run are old by the nature of them, because they've got to be a collaborative service between 43 forces. So both the national applications and some of the ones that run on premise, I think, are behind, and change is slow because the environment that they provide service into, it's operating procedures, it's mission critical. Change is difficult in policing, especially at the sharp end, in the control room and emergency response. There's a bit of I think for the managers and technical folk, I think there is a bit of an uncertainty or an understanding at a senior officer level as to what cloud is, how it works, and how complicated it is. I think is important. So there's a bit of maybe a misconception in management around the fact that it's sold as easy and just turn it on and turn it off, and apps and as a service. But we all know in practice, they're just computers. They're somewhere else. You've still got to look after them. You can do more with them, but you still need an IT team. You still need people who understand how to kind of own and run it. And I think that the last one I flagged was it's certainly in some customers, there's not a great relationship between the users at the sharp end and IT for whatever reason. And I think that any sort of technology adoption, and certainly public cloud more so because it is so self-service, needs to recognise there's got to be a better link between the users of the service at the sharp end and the teams in the technical function who support those services. I think those are certainly some of the common problems, and that's across, it varies wildly which area different forces are strong and not so strong in, but those are some of the common ones.
Mm-hmm. And taking again changes that we've seen in the last few years, and thinking obviously specifically to the adoption of cloud-based services, one that I'm sure is sort of near and dear to your heart in the world of delivery and change is service levels. And coming from me personally come from a telco background where it's service levels are kind of militantly drilled into you. Everything's mean time to fail, and that kind of is on the inside of your eyelids. Service levels is a funny one, because we've gone from understanding SLAs with multiple nines to what feels like an appetite of, hey, just throw it in the cloud and things go up and down and self-heal. And then you've got people on the periphery of that say, whoa, hang on a minute, I don't want self-healing, I want to know what's up, what's down. And then, of course, particularly when you're talking in this instance about potentially citizen outcomes, it's even more important. What have you seen around the attitudes towards service levels and service level agreements in lieu of cloud?
Again, there's probably a bit of catch up needs to happen regarding service levels and operating models, and a lot of the work we're trying to do at the moment is helping customers change exactly that. The fact that The business is used to expecting always on, no downtime, never any change windows. And that, if you're going to start building apps, you've got to recognize that those service levels internally are going to have to change. And you've got forces who've gone from very, 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 very high governance, low change to being, they'll have to flip that on their head and start to allow for a different, a different way of governing applications and change. So I wouldn't say we've seen any like drastic sea change. It's more in, from a governance perspective, the change has been that, forces are now allowed to do some of this stuff. I think is the biggest change in service levels and expectations from my side. And that, I think a lot of forces are still looking at public cloud and going, well, so what? What do I use it for? Being honest, and that, I guess that's another one of the challenges we see. It's a bit of a woolly answer, but I think in terms of, I know you're going to ask some practical considerations as well. I think that they're kind of tied together for me. The expectations of the service desk and what sort of practical considerations should we be thinking about. And I guess some of those are dealt with in the the cloud adoption framework. But big one for me is that there's got to be better collaboration between ops teams, like I say, at the sharp end delivering policing services and IT. They've got to be a partnership there and better communications. That business analysis type roles got to improve, because that's that's a big problem with with a lot of customers at the moment. And then the expectation, senior leadership needs to change, because I don't think public cloud is cheaper by default, and we shouldn't be looking at these services on a cost alone basis. I think there's this misconception that cloud is cheaper. It's a different cost, and if you don't design for cloud, you're not going to you're certainly not going to save any money. So there's an expectation there that needs addressing. I think the service level from IT needs to change as well, though, on the flip side, because the skill set required is very different. If you're going to design for public cloud, you've got to build your apps differently, and a lot of police customers don't do a huge amount of building, so that is going to be a massive cultural change. Like you say, Charlie, at the start, the ability to start deploying and building stuff is very different, and it's not a world I'm hugely familiar with, but I can see that is going to be wildly different for a lot of forces who are used to run VMs, buy a COTS product in a data center, do a version update every 6 months, to potentially releasing changes daily, weekly, monthly, however that's going to look.
I would say I do feel like it is a journey here, though. You don't have to go, I'm adopting cloud, I'm going to have to change everything, I'm going to have to build on cloud native services, and I don't need servers anymore. That's not going to drive the right outcomes, I don't think. And I guess just building on some of the bits that you mentioned around SLA, I do feel like SLA is still critically important. Like, we have to have an understanding of availability of our services, of the services that we're running. I just think that in many cases does become easier. There's a really good reliability white paper that's available under the well-architected framework that goes through and kind of deconstructs what does it mean to define SLAs and adhere to SLAs. And a lot of the time, the practices that you need to achieve those really robust SLAs, those tasks can be removed, the burden of them, by cloud, and leaning on services that enable you to focus less on worrying about availability and more about worrying about how can I improve the capabilities of this to enable my organization to do more.
No, I think you both mentioned it. There is about where there may be a lack of understanding, and that's sort of, again, coming back to that foundation is architect for cloud, design for cloud. These are another one that comes up for us a lot isn't just service levels, of course, it's cost, and it's not. You're absolutely right. Cloud isn't cheaper and it's not more expensive. It's about what you do with it. It's the same with physical tin. If you buy 10 things instead of one, it costs 10 times as much. It's about how you're going to approach that and how you're going to build it. You're right. Going back a few years, and the story I tell often is that if you spoke to anyone who said they'd embarked upon a digital transformation, loosely what they meant was they'd done a massive copy paste of all their stuff in a data center and just gone and stuck it in insert public cloud here. That's not a digital transformation, and we're learning again. This is that commonality across industry. That's been done everywhere. I've seen an example of that in every vertical in the world, I think. we are still on that constant evolution of seeing what we can and what we can't do. I think for me, what I would suggest is important, which I know you guys share this, is, coming back to the adoption life cycle that I'm sure many of us all know and love, is where the early adopters have come and gone. There's more than enough evidence there now to give us that foundation to build something sensible and to be able to dip our toe into ultimately this world in the smallest possible way, but to allow us to see what it looks like, how it functions, where we may make mistakes, where we may make gains, but encourage everyone to do that, because it's not, like I say, it's not a missive. It's not the world must go 100% to public cloud and do it in a year. That's not it, and that's just not a practical message. So I think it is about getting everything laid to allow us to move into that sort of slowly but surely, or quickly if that meets the business. So I suppose from that perspective, then, if I asked both of you, if I said, I'm a police force, how do I start my cloud journey? And or if I have just begun to move forwards, how do I continue that? What's the advice you'd give? I'm not going to say answer, because that makes it sound like it's absolute. What's the advice that you would give? Charlie, go for it.
So I think from my perspective, I think it's really critical to have some senior sponsorship for this, and being able to early on identify what value you're attempting to evidence with cloud. And I think then beyond that, it's really important to get the right team together that has are empowered to go and experiment and to go and evidence the value that they believe that they can provide with cloud, and to tie that very carefully back to some business outcomes. Because I think without that, it's really difficult to prove why you're going to be successful if you take this new path and start looking at cloud. So for me, I think another key area is to start small. Look at something that you can quickly evidence some value and run a number of those experiments. And the value of that is not only are you early on providing some business benefit, but you're also building up some experience, some capabilities within your own teams. You're starting to get an understanding of what's working for you, what isn't working for you. You're starting to be able to adapt some of your processes. You'll start to work out where are some of the bottlenecks around my organization that I might need to start considering. And then I think what generally happens is that team then can start to take a bit of a step back, and they can start to become an enabler for the rest of the organization, where they can start to bring other people that have business challenges they believe that they can solve with technology, and start to bring them into the fold, and getting them running their own experiments and providing them the experience that they've got, so that they can support driving more business outcome. And over time, that just starts to scale. But just coming back to that point around senior sponsorship, I think that is really critical to make sure that you have got that backing to say, yes, this is something that we want to do. And once we've evidenced it, then we can really start to lean into it and start to take it forward.
Yeah. Jez, what are your thoughts on the same thing? If it was your advice on a police fast? Oh dear.
Hopefully not that.
Let's try that again. On a police force to start their cloud journey, what do you think your advice would be? Obviously coming from a slightly different angle, maybe.
Yeah, totally. And it's really interesting because we, Softcat sell plumbing. So obviously I'm going to say, we sell digital plumbing. We're clearly going to say buy the right digital plumbing. But even without, I know we obviously did a bit of a run up to this, but I genuinely wrote some notes earlier today and put top of the list is need to put the right foundations in place. I know we've overused that word, but for me, I think that is absolutely critical, and that's across the three people, process, and technology areas, and that's making sure that you've got the right people, like you say, the right team, the right process, the right operating model. But then, and I know it's obviously a blatant plug for Cloud Gateway and related services, but I do think you got to make sure the network, the WAN, your plumbing is right, because what I foresee, and I don't want to say that we've done loads of cloud adoption, but in other areas of technology, you need to build the scale in at the start, so that when you've done your small workloads, if it does go well, you don't then go, oh well, sorry, you're going to have to wait 9 months while we plumb in a load of extra links to get the capacity to start to use these services in anger. And I think you've got to do that from the off, if you like. Design, start small, absolutely, but with the ability to scale, I think is really important. And that's the same in the team, and same in the process. Make sure that you're building robust processes. And I'm a big fan of spending extra time in design, in the planning phase, if you like, to make sure that when you do go live, you don't want to do it too long. I get that you want to move away from that waterfall, but for the first jump into public cloud or jump into a new service, I think that's really important. That planning phase, you're almost not going to spend too long on planning, because it'll pay off in the long run. Everyone will be better prepared. You do have to jump eventually, but that would be, from my perspective, I think getting the foundations right. Again, I know it's a common theme, but I think that's really important.
And I think just sticking with you then, Jez, for the moment. If you had to give an example of where you have seen this done well, so I suppose this is your opportunity to put a police force up on a pedestal. Where have you seen this done well?
I thought long and hard about this, and but because like I said, I don't want to claim we've done loads of big public cloud deployments, because it's not true. It's not fair, and I don't think there are that many in policing, being honest. It's still we're early in the cycle for public cloud. But where I have seen, I think, platform done well and been thought about is in our customers and friends in Sussex Police, and not from public cloud though. Just to disclaim that, I think what they've done is they've put in a software defined WAN platform, and I think that's really, really critical, because in much the same way as SASE is going to be the next version of that it's taking them a long time now to build the right foundations, but they're already seeing the benefits of being able to very quickly flex their networking infrastructure for different services and do that fail fast, try things and change quickly without moving at the speed of a service, a service provider. They're now in control of their own infrastructure, and they can very much flex the bandwidth, the quads, how they manage their WAN. And I think that's a really good example of cloud foundations, if you like, because one of the big things for them is they are going to be very quickly able to turn on bandwidth to do public cloud services, to send traffic straight to 365, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's probably my example. And I get it's not quite AWS, but I think they're already working out that because we've got the right WAN, it's easier to do all the services that connect to it.
Yeah, and Charlie, similarly, obviously, again, from maybe a different perspective, where have you seen it done well? If you could pick a single example.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'll call out a single example. I think what I'll do is more talk about forces that are getting behind this concept of building out this foundation and making sure that they take the time, as Jez says, to evaluate how they're going to adopt cloud, to understand the value that they hope to drive. But I think those forces that have been early adopters of PALs currently are already starting to see the benefits, where they've gone through that process of working with ourselves and partners like Softcat to build out the underlying infrastructure. And then as they've started to onboard workloads into that platform, they've realized how easily requirements can change. And I think at that point, they're starting to realize how quickly they can adapt to those changes, knowing that they've actually got a really solid foundation in place that puts the guardrails in place, that protect the data that they're putting in there, etc. It's interesting. There's something that we talk about at Amazon quite a bit, which is one-way and two-way doors. A one-way door needing quite a lot of scrutiny. It's really difficult to come back through, impossible to come back through potentially. And then two-way doors need kind of less scrutiny. And I think that those that are building this flexible foundation and are adapting to be able to listen to what the business needs, react to that, and then change their architecture to deliver those requirements are the ones that we're seeing starting to kind of pull ahead and do successfully.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think it gives me an opportunity to maybe shamelessly give my own advice as well, and lean on a real life example of where we've seen that done and done that. So I think building on the foundation, we're going to keep talking about that, being network people. that dipping the toe in, you know, not having to think that you're on this journey where you have to take everything and everything goes, is that kind of try before you buy, is making sure you go, you know, you're learning with it as you go. And from our perspective, you know, I said earlier, obviously we very much attempted to build the Cloud Gateway platform and have in a way that is the opposite of how traditional comms and infrastructure is built. You know, everything is essentially on demand, everything is there, everything is ready, all of the connectivity to the clouds and the on-premise and all of these good things, all nicely accredited within the confines of the government space as well. But what's important is that scale for us. So last year, it's amazing how time gets away with you. We were lucky enough to work with the good peeps at Avon and Somerset. So as was at the time, since moved, Justin Buzzard and Victoria Hallett. We worked with them to essentially be able to connect their on-premise data centers immediately through to cloud, demonstrate how quick that can be, how they can move workloads, how they can move from cloud to cloud, and how this can all be done securely, all done within the confines of a proof of concept, which of course has now been spun down. We're still working with them. That for me is that perfect demonstration of how we can work together to test that water, to see how these things can work. And we always say as well, it's a great opportunity to see how we act as a supplier as well. You know, if you're happy with how we're dealing with these things, then that's great. And I think, you know, again, coming back to today, it is important to us, and I very much hope for what police forces are seeing, that some of the parts is necessary, completely necessary for all of this to be delivered. You know, having the likes of AWS and Softcat, you know, big companies, an SME, Cloud Gateway, to be able to deliver those things together is something that we're all really, really keen on and you know, all proud of as well. So hopefully that continues and is as positive as it has been. So looking to wrap this up then, if I asked you for a closing thought or comment, Charlie, what would your closing thought or comment, your pearl of wisdom be?
I think to identify the value that you want to drive, and to look at what technologies, what small experiments you can run to achieve that. Look at building out that foundation. So using infrastructure that we've taken through national assurance to start experimenting with proving that value, to just evidence to the business why this is why flexibility is so important to meet the demands of any business.
Jez, what if you had same thing, one thought that you think is a takeaway?
I think it's probably don't do cloud for cloud's sake. I'd pick a business problem that you think cloud will solve and try and do that. You know, don't just think, oh, we've got to put some stuff in public cloud because we have to. I'd say very much like pick a problem and try and solve it, and work from that perspective. Don't just do cloud for cloud's sake, because I don't think you're gonna deliver the right outcomes and get the right goals if you're doing it just because you think you should do it. Like I say, pick something at the sharp end and see if you can fix it using these services, and yeah, like Charlie says, try again. Start small, experiment. Just do it and give it a go, rather than for the sake of it being there and you think you should do cloud.
Yeah. And I think from my perspective, I think you both mentioned people, process and technology. Sitting that within the confines of foundations again is you have to build those foundations. For me, foundations of those people, the right attitudes, the right beliefs, the right processes that bring it all together, and then the right technology, ideally from that starting point up. And you can start in this I know it sounds ridiculous, at the beginning, rather than having to plan for what the end is. And once you've got the foundations of all of those things in, you simply have that ability on tap effectively to be able to grow. So that is definitely what my pearl of wisdom, my advice would be, which leads me to to say that we have almost certainly run out of time. For questions that did come in, which I'm not entirely sure if I have access to or not, I think we will have to take those away and get those answered outside. I would just like to say thank you to everybody who has attended. Thank you very much for your time. I know everyone is busy all the time, not just this time of year. And I would invite anyone who has any further questions outside of this to come and drop them to myself, Jez, or Charlie directly. Please do get in contact. More than happy to talk about our experiences inside or outside of policing and to continue that discussion. So thanks very much for your time, and I look forward to speaking to you another time.